Hello everyone, Charles Watts here. Welcome to Inside Arsenal. It's Friday. We are there. We are at the end, very nearly, of the working week. We are just one day away from the Premier League getting back to it after a week of European football to focus on Arsenal versus Burnley tomorrow, 3 p.m. kickoff at the Emirates. I'll be there. Looking forward to that one. Mikel Arteta will be speaking ahead of that game a little bit later on today, 1:30 p.m. He is due to be up at London Colney. I'm not going to be there for that, unfortunately, because my children's school have decided that today has to be an inset day. And so I have my two kids next door playing on their Nintendo Switch right now who are going to take up all of my time today. So unfortunately, I won't be at London Colney, but I will be listening out to see what Mikel Arteta has to say. We'll get team news, I'm sure, from him, get some updates on Odegaard, Saka, players like that ahead of that game against Burnley. So should be an interesting one. A little bit later on, we will talk about that game against Burnley today in today's show. Look at who could well be starting, talk about some of the injury doubts. We've got some interesting, worrying, disappointing news on Thomas Partey's injury as well, which we'll start today's show on. Got some comments from Gareth Southgate about Aaron Ramsdale. Got plenty of questions from you guys as well. So a lot to get stuck into today. And like I said, we'll start with the news, the big news that has come out in the last 24 hours or so about Thomas Partey. John Cross reporting exclusively that Partey has now undergone a small medical procedure on this thigh injury and that he won't play again in 2023, which is news I think a lot of us were beginning to expect, but now it's been confirmed is really, really disappointing. It means that it means he's going to miss about 14 games for certain. And that's if he comes back at the start of 2024, which we don't know about yet. Of course, AFCON then rolls around at the end of January, I think it is. Potentially, if he goes to that, if he gets fit and goes to that, then, Arsenal could be looking at till February time until they really start getting Thomas Partey playing for them this season, which is just a huge blow, a massive blow. I spoke about it in yesterday's show. I was just really, really looking forward to really been eagerly anticipating being able to see a midfield of Declan Rice and Thomas Partey playing together for Arsenal. The quality that would bring to the middle of the pitch, the ability, the extra ability that Arsenal would have to just stifle opponents and strangle games and control games. Just really, really exciting prospect, a tantalising prospect. But unfortunately, now it doesn't look like we're going to see that at least until basically could end up being just a couple of months left of the season. And even then, you've got to rely on Partey's, fitness coming back and staying fit after that. And it's just a big blow. And it's just kind of, it's just another injury in the sort of litany of injuries that Thomas Partey has had since he's arrived at Arsenal. And it's just, it's a real shame. I don't know what else you can really say about it other than that it is a shame. And, there's been a lot of frustration. I've seen it on the timeline in the last 24 hours since this news broke, with people saying that's it. It's time to move on from Thomas Partey now. And Arsenal have got a big decision to make. We've said that, we've talked about that before. I mean, obviously with his injury record, with his contract situation, he's only going to have a year left at the end of this season. Arsenal are going to have a big decision to make. I mean, the injury records, if they do decide, okay, it's time to cash in on Thomas Partey, as good a player as he is, the injury record might not actually make that too easy. But we'll have to wait and see it. But as I said, lots of you have been getting in touch and talking about it. Hussein says we have to sign another midfielder to replace Partey sooner rather than later because we can't rely on him. It's costing us games. Signing a top midfielder and striker, I'm sure, will be dominating in English football for years to come. We have a very good team. It is obvious. Matt Harvey says you touched on Partey and how amazing it would be. It would make our midfield more of a transfer question, wishful thought. But have you seen anyone in Europe or Premier League who you'd like to see brought in for whenever Partey moves on? Mine would be Tuchemeni. Thanks, Matt. I think there was another comment here talking about midfielders and potential sort of players after Partey. And the guy from Africa here mentioned Zubimendi, obviously, who's been heavily linked with Arsenal and at Real Sociedad, has also been linked with the likes of Barcelona. I think Bayern Munich, have been linked with him recently. And it just beginning to feel inevitable. I mean, last summer, I reported it at the time, Arsenal were open, potentially letting Thomas Partey go if a good offer came in for him. That didn't happen. So he stayed. And the club were quite happy for him to stay. It wasn't like they were actively pushing him out the door last summer, but they were just open, given his injury record, given his contract situation and his age. They were open. If something materialised, they would have listened to it. I'm sure that'll be the case this summer as well. Business point of view, and probably now football point of view, because of these injuries, it just has to be done. It just has to be considered. And, it's going to be really hard to replace Thomas Partey. Those questions there saying, who would you like? Matt here saying, who would you like? It's really hard. Obviously, players like Tchouaméni, I mean, that'd be great, fantastic. But you're going to get Tchouaméni out of Real Madrid? I highly doubt it. That's not based on any information. I'm not sure Real Madrid would be too keen to let someone like Tchouaméni go at his age and his quality and how expensive he would be. They've got players like Camavinga as well. There's lots of players like that who would be really, really appealing if they were on the market, but they're just very hard to get out of clubs. Top-level defensive midfielders are really difficult to come by, and especially ones who you would be tasking with the job of replacing someone like Thomas Partey, because his role in the team is so unique and his qualities are so unique. It's like Declan Rice, for me, is Arsenal's Thomas Partey replacement. I think they've already got their Thomas Partey replacement, because I think Declan Rice will be Arsenal's long-term number 6. He's just not going to be the same player as Declan Rice. So as Thomas Partey, it's going to have to evolve a little bit. So I think when we talk about bringing in a midfielder because of Partey's injury, I think that's going to have to be the case at some point. If it's not in January, then in the summer. But I don't think it's necessarily someone who's going to come in and just completely replace Thomas Partey. I think it may be someone who'll be coming in to fill another of the midfield spots, because Declan Rice long term is Arsenal's number 6. I don't see him being a number 8 or anything like that long term. I think it's definitely to be 6. This is like a bit of a transition year, and eventually he will be that guy. And it's a case of who's going to be coming in to potentially play ahead of him in one of the left 8 roles or the right 8 role. Well, not right 8 because Martin Odegaard, but you see what I mean. So Zubimendi's been heavily linked with Arsenal and is a very good player from the... I haven't seen him much. I'm not some La Liga expert who sits down and watches Real Sociedad religiously, but from the bits and pieces I've seen of him, looks like a really tidy player. No surprise, top-level clubs are after him. He's got that quality. He's got the technique to play that role. And, whether he would be an ideal man to come in remains to be seen. It's just all hypothetical at the moment, because I've got no information on actual midfielders who Arsenal are 100% looking at this summer or this January. But I think this Thomas Partey thing, I think they have to think about something in January. If they weren't really considering something in January, if they were going to wait till the summer, I think now with this news, you've got to potentially bring it forward a little bit, and it has to be on the agenda for January, I think. I wouldn't say it'd be a certainty, but I think it has to be surely on the agenda, because you're relying... I think Arsenal look a bit weak in that midfield at the moment. I think if Partey's fit, they look really strong, because you've got Partey, Rice, Jorginho, Elneny. That's a strong quartet, really, with Elneny obviously 4th in the pecking order. But with one of them gone, and especially with one of them gone fairly long term, like Partey is, you basically just got Jorginho, Rice, and Elneny. I don't know that you can get that through till the end of the season, because I think it's hard to rely on Thomas Partey and say, well, he'll be back in January, we'll have him for the rest of the season. I don't think there's no evidence to suggest that you can rely on that, because we've seen what happens with Thomas Partey. We see how often he's injured. So, I think January has to be really high up on the agenda now, a midfielder, which probably wasn't the case before this news, but really disappointing. Let me know what you guys think about the whole situation about Partey. Do you think Arsenal need to go into the market now in January? Do they need to protect themselves for the second half of the season by bringing in another midfielder? Let me know, of course, in the comments below. Actually, just quickly go back to this question. Not talking about Zubimendi, he was asking about Zinni playing in midfield role against... who was it? Who did Arsenal played? Sevilla on Wednesday night. And it was interesting. It was the first real time we've seen it. Interestingly, it wasn't in the left 8 role, was it? He sort of moved over to the right-hand side when he moved into midfield. But it's something I really do want to see more often. I don't know why we haven't. And we've spoken about it before, haven't we? It just feels like such a good option to have. But Mikel, for whatever reason, doesn't seem to want to do it. I think he's got all the qualities to play that midfield role really, really well. We know how technically gifted he is. We know how good he is on the ball. We know he can find a pass and he can split the lines of his passing. So it just feels like, if you're a little bit light, give Zinchenko a go, but he doesn't. So it was nice to see it in that game against Sevilla, but I don't think it's something we're necessarily going to start seeing more and more so far, more and more this season, just because we saw it on Wednesday night. Gareth Southgate named his England squad yesterday. Saka's in it, Ramsdale's in it, Declan Rice is in it, no Eddie Nketiah. Somewhat surprising, because he's been in the last 2 groups, 2 squads, And since the last one, he scored a hat-trick in the Premier League. So I thought he would be in it. The fact he's not maybe suggests to me that he's not going to be fit for this weekend. Maybe it's not just a football thing. Maybe it is just because Gareth Southgate's been told he's not fit, so he's not going to be in the squad. Ramsdale is, and he was talking about Aaron Ramsdale and his situation, obviously not playing much for Arsenal at the moment. Gareth Southgate was asked about, is this going to impact his chances of being selected for England and being in the squad and going to the Euros next summer? He said, we're just going to have to see how it goes. I had that conversation with him in the last camp. He's still battling to be the number one at Arsenal in his profile, and the way he can use the ball with his feet, we liked and think it is important. But there is a reality as a keeper. If we get to March and he's 6 months without playing regularly, then I'm never going to promise things that I couldn't guarantee delivering. So he knows that. He's perfectly realistic about that. Interesting comments from Southgate, especially when he's basically playing Harry Maguire all the time for the last 2 years, despite him not playing regularly at all. Calvin Phillips as well. Although I can kind of see it, maybe goalkeepers, you need to play a little bit more regularly to make sure you're not rusty. But it certainly raises the question of, what's Ramsdale going to be pushing for come January? Is he going to be pushing to leave the club in January to make sure that he can go to the Euros in the summer, to make sure he gets playing time over the second half of the season? I think I'd be very surprised if Arsenal would allow that, because the last thing they want, I imagine, in January is weakening themselves for the second half of the season. And if you let Ramsdale go and have to bring in an inferior goalkeeper who's more happy to sit on the bench over the second half of the season, then you're weakening your squad. I fully expect Ramsdale to go at some point fairly soon. I just don't know about January. I think if the situation stays the same, Ramsdale and Raya, if Raya signs permanently, which we expect he will, it's not a long-term thing, is it? It's not going to happen. It just doesn't happen in football. You're not going to have two goalkeepers of that quality, of that stature in the squad for long-term. One season, perhaps. More than that, I don't see it. So one of them is going to end up going. And that's just, again, that's not me just on talking about information I have. That is just on just football experience. And, I can't see it. Ramsdale's not, if he's not going to play, he's not going to want to sit on the bench at Arsenal. As much as he loves Arsenal, as much as he loves the fans, he's not going to want to sit on the bench because he wants to play. He's got a short career. He wants to play for England. And he's going to go. But it is interesting hearing Southgate come on the record and talk like this, because it just makes you think what Ramsdale will be thinking come January. If he really wants to play for England, if he really wants to go to Euros in the summer, which I'm sure he does, will he start to kick up a little bit of a fuss about the situation? That's something we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, I thought they were interesting comments from Southgate nonetheless. Okay, just turning the attention to the weekend and the game against Burnley. Obviously, we're waiting on updates from Mikel today to see if he's in an open mood when it comes to team and injury news, which, let's face it, he very rarely is. But as I said, Nketiah not in the England squad. Interesting. Makes me think he could well be missing out with that injury picked up against Newcastle. Gabriel Jesus, we'll wait and see. Arsenal in talks with Brazil at the moment about what's going on there. He's been called up by Brazil for the internationals. Arsenal, of course, would be very reluctant to let him go if he is injured. I think if he plays against Burnley, then obviously they're not going to be able to stop him going, because it's just the rules. And if you play against Burnley, you can't really say, well, no, you can't go with your international team. If he doesn't play against Burnley, I think they're well within their rights to make sure he stays in England, and they certainly should do that. Edu will be talking to them at the end of the week once the situation becomes clearer with Gabriel Jesus. So we'll wait and see on him. Odegaard, again, certainly the sounds coming out of Norway is that he's not going to be involved during the international break, which would suggest he's definitely not going to play tomorrow. So Arsenal have got some injuries. I think this international break, and I don't like them normally, they're disruptive and they annoy me, but it does feel like this is actually quite a good time for Arsenal to go into an international break, just to give themselves a couple of weeks without a game to try and patch some of these players up. Saka, we hope he's going to be fit, but we just don't know at the moment after that injury he picked up in midweek against Sevilla as well. So there's lots of players who are really struggling with fitness and injury issues at the moment with Arsenal. And so this little fortnight feels like it could potentially be coming at a good time when you can get Odegaard sorted, you can get Emil Smith-Rowe sorted, Bukayo Saka, Eddie, Gabriel Jesus, players like that, so that when they come back after international break, when we start to really head towards December and that really intense, busy period over the festive season, that the squad is going to be in a lot healthier shape. So yeah, interesting to see. If they don't play, if some of these key players don't play, it's like, what do you do? Who's going to feature? If Bukayo doesn't make it, what are you going to do there? Without Martin Odegaard, it is a worry. Without Gabriel Jesus, it is a worry. You're down to the bare bones. Then you'd think probably Reece Nelson on the right. You would think Trossard up front and Martinelli on the left. That it's still a fairly lively front three, but it is hell of a lot weaker than it could have been So, yeah, lots of decisions for Mikel Arteta to make going into that game against Burnley. Okay, some questions and comments from you guys. Vet Parrot here says, this was about our discussion yesterday on Inside Arsenal Extra Time. If you haven't seen that show or listened to that show, you can find it back down here in YouTube or on wherever you're listening to this on your podcast. It went out last night, and we were talking about Ivan Toney and the reports that Brentford have slapped a £100 million price tag on him for January. Both of us kind of against that idea. It just sounds like far too much money for Ivan Toney. And Vet Paris says, I'm 100% with James on this, but there is basically no chance we sign Toney. Too expensive, too old. In all likelihood, he has some character flaws, not an Arteta signing. I don't really follow Italian football, and I think he has come back from a bad injury. But what has happened to Tabby Abraham? I think Tammy's still injured. He did his ACL, didn't he, for Roma? Player that Arsenal used to like, and were very keen on before he went over to Italy. He ended up going to Italy. Obviously had a good start with Roma, but then picked up that ACL injury, and I don't think he's back from that yet. So I think he's still on the touchline. And Mr. Dynamite says, if Arsenal are going to spend that kind of money, get CL winner Osimhen. Toney is merely a decent PL striker. He's done nothing to suggest he's worth two Jesuses for crying out loud. Is Osimhen a CL winner? With who? He's not a CL winner, is he? But Ivan Toney and Victor Osimhen for that amount of money. There's only, as much as I like Ivan Toney, and I do like Ivan Toney, I'd be going for Osimhen all day long. And yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where he goes, because it does feel like this is going to be the summer that Victor Osimhen goes somewhere. But I think there's going to be a hell of a lot of interest in him. I think a club down the road in West London are certainly going to be interested in him as well. But yeah, I agree. If that's the sort of money we're talking about, that's the striker that I would be targeting for Arsenal. Here's one from Nathan. Says, any insights as to why Arteta is selecting Nketiah over Trossard? When Trossard is in the team, when Jesus is injured, we look more cohesive unit, while Trossard doesn't possess Eddie's physicality and pace, his intricate passing and movement. So hard for defenders to stop. That trio, Saka, Martinelli and Trossard, was so good to watch last season. Yeah, I agree. Look, I think Mikel likes Eddie Nketiah. We know that. It's clear. I think he's really impressed by his work ethic, what he does, what he can bring to the team. And, a lot of us might not see it completely. I happen to think Eddie's a really good player, good striker. He's obviously not Arsenal number one, and nor should he be Arsenal's number one, but I can see why Mikel is persisting with him. But I do also agree that I really like Trossard as a 9 when he plays there. I think there's a real fluidity to Arsenal's attack that isn't there when Eddie's there, because Eddie just doesn't possess that kind of link-up skill and that ability of the little sort of passes around the corners, the quick 1-2s that Trossard does, because of his far superior technique and understanding, I think, with Martinelli and Saka. And again, we talked about this in Inside Arsenal Extra Time. There's a little bit more of that Jesus type understanding when Trossard's in the team in terms of Saka and Martinelli than there is when Eddie's in the team. And, even if Eddie's fit for this weekend, I absolutely want Trossard to continue as the 9 for tomorrow's game. Here's one from Afro Gooner before we wrap things up. Says, I'm concerned about the effectiveness of our free kicks and corner kicks. We have tall players waiting on our opponents' big box. However, we seem to not able to reach them or pick them out, and thus wasting an attacking opportunity. Thanks for a great channel. Thank you for that. Yeah, look, I think recently in the last few games, Arsenal set pieces have been poor. They were poor against Newcastle. I think they had 11 corners against Newcastle and didn't really threaten with any of them. I thought they were relatively poor again in midweek, although they had one at the start, which Havertz should have done better with when he put the header wide. But Arsenal have scored 6 goals from set pieces this season. That's the most, or the joint most, with Manchester City of any team in the Premier League. So they have been useful from set piece situations this season, certainly at the start. And I thought there were some really clever routines. The one, I think back to the goal that Trossard scored against Everton, that really clever short corner routine that Arsenal did. So I don't think they're awful at them. I just think the last few games, they've just fallen off a cliff a little bit in terms of the quality of the delivery. And it was very, very noticeable against Newcastle, obviously. I think that wound us all up, especially at 1-0 when Arsenal had a few corners and just kept getting them wrong. So there is improvement to be had. But I do think Arsenal still are one of the sort of leading lights in the Premier League when it comes to their set pieces and the quality of their set pieces and the goal threat that they possess from set pieces. So I'm not overly worried about it. I just think at the moment they're just in a little bit of a dip, and hopefully they'll sort that out, start getting the deliveries right, and then we'll see some more goals start coming from set pieces as we did at the start of the season. All right, that's it from me, everyone. Thank you very much for your time. As always, whether you've been watching this on YouTube or listening on your podcast, I do appreciate it. I'll be back in the morning to just do a very, very quick sort of match preview, predicted 11, that sort of thing, discuss what Mikel Arteta had to say in today's press conference. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Until then, have a very good Friday, everyone, and I'll speak to you soon.